All right. So you probably heard last night, I did, that Israel bombed a hospital in Gaza and killed hundreds. It's interesting, one bomb and you kill hundreds, right? Well, when the sun came up in the morning and Israel said, no, we didn't, and they released the tape of the terrorists talking, and they were like, yeah, we shot the missile from the cemetery. I don't know about you, but I think of cemeteries as places where dead people are, not a place where you install missile batteries, but they did. And it went up over the hospital, and it actually landed in the parking lot. So if it killed hundreds, there's hundreds of people in the parking lot. I don't know what they were doing there overnight in the parking lot. But in the fog of war, a lot of what you hear is not true. Okay? And you have to dig and find. And I just listened to over an hour presentation from a man who's a Turk from Germany who came to America for freedom and who left Islam. He calls himself the apostate prophet, and he works with other Christians. He's yet to come to Christianity, but he left Islam, and he's an apostate. And he just wanted to present the facts, and he showed the video and everything, and he showed the facts. So I would just tell you, what I'm going to tell you, when it's in here, you can trust it. All right? So, let's go to Genesis. And I'm literally going to go through some history of Israel, some points where I can point out some things about Islam in the Bible, and some other stuff we have. So we're going to go to Genesis, and we're going to chapter 12. And I want to remind you that Genesis is the book of beginnings, and it starts with creation. And then when we get to Abraham, who is not a Jew, he lives in Ur of the Chaldees, which is in modern-day Babylon or Iraq. He is told this in chapter 12. It's the Abrahamic covenant. Now the Lord said to Abram, he doesn't have the Hach, the spirit yet, the Ham, he just has Abram. Go forth from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house, this is the Ur of the Chaldees, to a land which I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those, and those who curse you I will curse. And all the families of the earth will be blessed. So that's the Abrahamic covenant. You've heard it many times. It's one of the reasons why we support Jewish people, because of verse 3. He was in Ur, which was a large, wealthy city, and it was on the Euphrates River toward the Persian Gulf. And there was a God for every day of the year. That's how polytheistic they were, okay? And he listens to the God of heaven, and he says, I'm going to get up and go. So he makes the months trip up and around, which he'd follow the river, to what we call the modern-day Holy Land. He is given a land covenant. And in the land covenant, he's told this. Now, just to give you a little thing, he's told he's going to have all this offspring. And then he's told in Genesis chapter 15, I'm going to read verse 13. All right, I'll read verse 13. This is another covenant he's given. God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. They will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. Now, is Egypt offering reparations to the Jews yet for the 400 years of slavery? Just a thought. Just a thought. I know, sounds crazy. So God tells Abram, still hasn't had the Spirit yet, that they're going to be strangers, and they go to Egypt for 400 years. And they are indeed. And, of course, Satan would know that too. All right. It will come about, verse 17, when the sun sets in a very dark place, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed through the pieces. That's the covenant. So this is the covenant that God is making with Abram. He says, on the day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land. Okay, so now Abram gets the gift of a land. And you may say, well, Muslims claim Abraham, and they do, but they claim him through Ishmael. And in chapter 22, when God says to Abraham, I need you to go offer your son. He says, Abraham, Ishmael is alive, probably middle age. Isaac is probably in his 30s, maybe 20s. He says, I want you to take your son, your one and only son. God does not address Abraham as having two sons. He does not say, don't take Ishmael, take Isaac. He says, take your one, your only son, which is Isaac. All right? So Isaac has the claim to Abraham, not Ishmael. And the Muslims go through Ishmael. And the Jews and Christians go through Isaac. All right. So this is a covenant that's given to the Jewish people. To your descendants, I've given this land from the river of Egypt, the Nile. Okay, that's a lot of room. As far as the great river, the Euphrates. Okay, that's a lot of land. All right? That's modern day Iraq to modern day Egypt. That's the swath of the Middle East. The Kenites, the Kizarites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Pezerites, the Rephaites, and Amorites, Canaanite, Girgashite, and Jebusite. All the lands of these people, God has given to Abraham. That's his land. All right? Now, what's interesting is that Abraham is given the land as a possession. And if you go to verse 9 of chapter 23, this is fascinating. All right? Sarah is dead now. Abraham rises to mourn the death of Sarah. All right? And Abraham rose and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth, and spoke with them, saying, if it is your wish for me to bury the dead out of my sight, hear me. Approach Ephron, the son of Zorah, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. This is the cave of the patriarch, which is where Sarah was buried, and we believe Abraham was buried, and is now in Muslim territory, which he owns, which is at the end of the field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence, for a burial site. And he tries to give it to him for free, and Abraham says, I will pay the full price of the land. 400 shekels of silver between you and me to bury the dead. So Abraham, given the opportunity to say, this land is my land, God gave it to me. There's another group of people living there, and he says, I need to bury my dead. I need this piece of property. I'm going to pay the full price. And they said, Abraham, you're so honored, we'll give it to you. And he says, I will not take it. I will pay the full price for the cave at Machpelah. And that's, at this point, kind of an interesting fact. All right. So, Abraham is given this land covenant from the river in Egypt to the great river Euphrates. Abraham obviously dies. Then there's Isaac and Jacob, which I want to jump to Jacob, kind of give you some of this overview of the history. Jacob wrestles with God, and in Genesis chapter 32, it says this of Jacob, all right? In verse 28 of Genesis 32, he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. And in that verse 22, that means he who strives with God. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. So this is Jacob saying, or this is God saying, I'm Jacob, I'm changing your name to Israel. All right? And we know you've got Abraham, you have Isaac, and then you have Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph one of his younger sons, the second to the youngest is Benjamin, who's the youngest, is the one who's sold into slavery, who goes down to Egypt, and who's given the visions, kind of like Daniel. Genesis 37, 39 through 50 tells of the life of Joseph. If you want to read it, it's a great story. People ask me what my dog's name is. I said Josie, and they're like, that's nice. And I said, well, it's the female version of Joseph, because I love Joseph. He's that's my son's middle name. So Joseph goes down to Egypt, saves Egypt. God saves the whole country through him, and he lives there, and he brings his family from where they were in Canaan down to Egypt. And that's what happened, and that's why, while they were in Egypt, they multiplied and they spent the 400 years of slavery. All right? So you've got Abraham, not much on Isaac. You've got Jacob being called Israel, the nation, the land, the 12 tribes. And so they're in Egypt for 400 years of slavery. And one arises, it tells you in Acts 12, that was not like the other pharaohs. I believe that he didn't have the same connection, maybe the same heritage. And so he ruled with an iron fist. A weak ruler will often bully the people. Mark that. It's the truth. Now, what happened was, he told the children of Egypt, or the children of Israel in Egypt, you need to make bricks to make these monuments we're building, but you need to get your own straw. So he would press them. So God raises up Moses, right, a deliverer. And he saves Moses in many, many ways, very interesting. And he takes them out. That's the whole book of Exodus. He gets them out of Egypt, heading to the promised land. Well, when they're heading to the promised land, they've got to spy out the promised land. Now, I'm going to give you a theory. And I think it bears true. I think you can prove it if you think it through and look it up and look at some of the characters we encounter. Judges 14, the Anakim that Caleb goes after, the sons of Anak, some of those things. But what I want to share with you is out of Numbers 13. All right? Numbers 13 is a fascinating chapter because Moses, they get to the area of Zin, the wilderness, and he says, you know what? Guys, I need, out of the 12 tribes, he said, I'm gonna take spies. So they sent in 12 spies, all right? Now, they're in Kadesh Barnea at the time. They send the 12 spies in, and they return from spying out the land. In Numbers 13, I'm going to read verse 25 there. At the end of 40 days. Okay, remember 40 days. That's interesting how it appears. Jesus is in the wilderness 40 days. They were in the wilderness 40 years. All right. They proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation, the sons of Israel, in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them that and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him, and they said, we went into the land that you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey and its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and their cities are fortified. They're very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak. They kind of tie that into the to Goliath of Gath. People even call him a Nephilim. Amalek is living in the land of Negev and the Hittites, and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. And Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against these people. They are too strong for us. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied, the land through which we had gone, and spying out the land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of great size. We also saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in their own sight, and so we are in their sight. And that's kind of like Goliath of Gath and his brothers. So they go into the land. It's their land to take. They've been in captivity for 400 years. God brings them out through the Red Sea, gives them the law on Sinai, walks them up to Kadesh Barnea, says, Moses, send out your 12 spies. The 12 spies are supposed to look at the land, see who lives where, develop a battle plan. They come back and say, we can't do it. They're too big, too strong. And then they start to grumble against Moses. And God says, all right, for 38 years, you guys are going to walk in one big circle. And Moses is going to die, and that whole generation is going to die, except for Joshua and Caleb. And we catch up with them in the book of Joshua. Right? Now, why am I telling you this? Because it was their land to take. But in 400 years, and here's my theory that's not in the scriptures, but I'm going to tell you it's what I think happened. If you're Satan, and you know God has a people, and you know God has a land where they're going to go, and you know they're in captivity, what are you going to do? You're going to sow the land with as much evil, demonic activity as possible. Like, I'm not sending one demon to North America. I'm sending them all to the Holy Land to do all their demonic work and completely possess every person that I can find in the Holy Land. Would you not do that? Which is why it is a spiritual battle when they end up going in. All right? And people say, God, he believes in genocide. Well, we'll get to it in a point, because nobody would make peace with the Jews, and we're going to get to that in a point. Okay. All right. So we're nowhere close to moving right along. Okay. All right. So we're going to go into extra innings, and everyone's going to be super excited. Okay. So let's go to Joshua. All right. So in Joshua, Moses dies. Joshua's going to go in the land, going to conquer the land. As he goes in the land, a couple things. In verse 19 and 20 of chapter 11, so go to chapter 11, verses 19 and 20. I'll read verse 18 too. Joshua waged war a long time against all these kings. Verse 19 says, there was not a city which made peace with the sons of Israel, except the Hivites, living in Gibeon. And they took them all in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts to meet Israel in battle, in order that he might utterly destroy them, and they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So he's trying to purify the land of all that had gone on. All right? And if you go to chapter 14, still in Joshua, and you go to verse 10, it says, now behold, the Lord has let me live. This is Caleb speaking. As he spoke these 45 years, from that time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I am 85 years old today. Verse 11, I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now. All right, so if you're aging, that's your verse you claim. Joshua 14:11, right? 85, still strong. Here's the deal. What I want to tell you. So they walked in the wilderness 38 years. He was about 40 when he went and spied out the land. Minus 85. Take 40 and 38, add them together, minus 85, and you get 7 years that Joshua campaigned to take the land over. Kind of interesting parallel to Revelation. Just saying. You can figure that out on your own. But Joshua spent 7 years conquering the land. All right. So, under Joshua, they go into the land. They take the land. Then they start doing what's right in their own eyes. And they have the time of judges. God raises up people to help them, to save them. One of which is Samson, who we'll get to in a little bit. But what I want to go to, they wanted a king, so they picked the wrong guy. They picked Saul. God says, that's not a king. David's the king. So then David gets put in power, and David gets put in power about 1000 BC, 1003 BC. And let me read 2 Samuel to you, verse 4 and 5 of chapter 5. And this is important to note, because this is when the land was ruled by Israel, northern, southern kingdom that's not divided yet. It's a nice big land. It goes out into modern-day Syria, modern-day Jordan. It goes up into Lebanon, right? It goes down even toward Saudi Arabia. They had a large swath of land under David. It said in verse 4 of 2 Samuel 5, when David was 30, he became the king. He reigned for 40 years. Okay, that's pretty easy. So he reigned till he's 70. They had term limits back then. I'm just kidding. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years, 6 months. All right? And in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and all Judah. So he reigned over the whole kingdom for 33 years. All right? When he took it over. And that's important to note. Now, what's interesting is his son takes over in 970 BC, right? Around then, King Solomon builds a temple, and his reign's over at around 930. By the time we get into the Kings, so I'm going to go into 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 8. By the time we get into the Kings, it describes Solomon, his reign, and then when he dies, his son, King Rehoboam, takes over a united kingdom, and he talks to his old counselors, and he talks to his young counselors, and his old counselors say, cut taxes on the people, be kind to the people, they'll follow you, you'll keep the kingdom united. His young counselors say, are you kidding me? You let them know who's boss. And so in verse 8 it says, but he forsook the counsel of the elders, which he had given him, and he consulted the young men who'd grown up with him and served him. And so he basically tells the whole kingdom, I'm going to be harsh. He said, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. I don't know if that's really a great political speech. Probably not. So what happened? The kingdom divides. If you look at verse 17, it says, the sons of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. So all of a sudden, you've got Saul, which was not the right king, who had a united kingdom. David, who expands the kingdom, who's a wonderful king. And then you've got his son, Solomon, who builds the temple and gets temple worship going. And then when he's dead, his son, Rehoboam, acts like he's going to do whatever he wants. And the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin, the two tribes in the south, become their own kingdom. In the north, you've got Israel under Jeroboam. And that's also in chapter 12. And so now the kingdom divides. And the kingdom stays divided. And what's fascinating is, in 2 Kings 17, verses 5 and 6, it tells you this. It says, all right, hang on, 17, 5 and 6. Then the king of Assyria, that's modern-day Syria, invaded the whole land, went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Syria, captured Samaria and carried Israel into exile to Assyria. And okay, so that's the Assyrian exile. That's when the northern kingdom is taken off their land, all right? Now, here's the thing. This is where people say the tribes got lost. But they didn't get lost, because when the kingdom divided, if you're living up north and you're with Ephraim, you're like, hey, babe. I'm a man talking to his wife, pardon me. Not just in general, babe, pardon me. Hey, babe, we got to worship at the temple. I'm not going over to these mountains and worship over here. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to the temple. So we're going to move down to Benjamin or Judah and live down in the southern kingdom. So there was a lot of movement among the northern and southern kingdom at that time, because the north was doing idolatry. And so there's an intermixing of tribes. So the northern kingdom gets carried off in 722. It actually gets carried off, and the Assyrians did it a different way. They didn't keep them as one group. They would spread them out through their kingdom to try to weaken their power, and the Jews intermarried, and that's kind of what happened. All right? So, that's in 722. There's still a southern kingdom. It's called Judah, and it lasts until... Now, Jeremiah prophesies it's going to fall. Lamentations is looking at when it fell. It's Nebuchadnezzar who takes them off the land. 605, he comes in, he takes the captives, right? He takes the young men. He comes back in 597. He does another besieging. And then 586, he destroys the temple. Ezekiel would have gone in 597 because he takes like 10,000 people then. All right? So there's waves, but this is called the Babylonian exile and the Babylonian captivity. And the nation is marched to Babylon and put under the thumb of King Nebuchadnezzar. All right? And you can look that up. I'll just give you the cross references. I'm not going to read them for time's sake because I'm going to go over. 2 Kings 24:14 and 2 Kings 25:11 tells you how the people were taken off the land. So after this time of captivity, and 2 Chronicles 16:15 through 23 talk about the destruction of the temple on a day called Tish B'Av. And both temples actually were destroyed on the same day. On Tish B'Av. Look it up. And you can read about it. All the Jews know that. All right. So this temple was destroyed. Now, there's no temple. They're off the land. Now, the current book we're going through, which we've already went through this a few weeks ago, is the book of Ezra. And Ezra's is with Nehemiah. And Esther kind of stuck together as historical books. So after the 70 years captivity in Babylon, after the Babylonian kingdom is destroyed by the Medes and the Persians, it says this in Ezra, verses 1 through 3 of chapter 1. Now in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. So he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom and also put it in writing, saying, thus says the king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me the kingdom and all the earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem. Okay, they're going to rebuild the temple and the city and the land. Whoever is among you, of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. After 70 years in captivity, they go back to the land. They go back to the land. They lay the foundation in chapter 3. The temple's not built yet. It's not built till Haggai and Zechariah call them out to build it, which happens later. Okay? But the temple's not fully built yet. And the wall's not built. Nehemiah builds the wall. And he does that about, because it's 538 that they get sent back to the land. Now they're on the land, and they're living there. And after Malachi speaks, there's 400 years of silence. Now in those 400 years, things happen, and things happen historically, which we have written down, and some of you may have read some of these books. But I want to highlight one thing that happened, because when they went back to the land, they didn't have self-governance. They had the temple, they had their religion, they had their religious law, which functioned separately from the civil law, but they never have had self-governance until 1948. Now, well, they had it for a few years briefly. The Maccabees, under Judas the Hammer Maccabee, and the Maccabean revolt around 167 to kind of 150 BC, the Romans and the Greeks and the Romans are hard on them. And so they revolt, and they have self-governance. And this is when they go into the temple, and they only have oil, I think, for 1 or 2 nights. And the oil lasts for a bunch of nights, and then that's what they celebrate Hanukkah, all right, the Festival of Lights, all right? So they had self-governance briefly under the Maccabees, but there are Jews living in the land from the time of Abraham, and then they go to 400 years of captivity in Egypt, and then they come out as a nation. They're a nation, okay? And at that point, they're living in the land. The only time they're not in the land is for 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Then they return. And there's always been Jews living in the land since then. They have not always had self-rule. They did not have self-rule when they came back under Ezra in 538. They lost self-rule when Nebuchadnezzar took them off in the Babylonian captivity. All right. In 63 BC, the Romans take over. All right. And Rome, again, it's a vassal state of Rome, but they're still functioning. They've got a temple. They've got religious courts, but they're living under Caesar. That's why when Jesus is asked, do we pay taxes to Rome? And he says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, because Caesar was the political power over the Holy Land. But the Jews were living there. They were living there. Then what happens is they're so difficult to deal with that in 70 AD, the Romans have had it up to here with them, and they had given them all kinds of extra accommodations they hadn't given other ethnic groups of people. And they just were tired of them. So they rolled in with Titus Vespasian in 70 AD, and they besiege Jerusalem, and they end up destroying the temple, which is the second temple that's destroyed. And every stone's taken off another because they burn the temple, and all the gold melts down through the stones, and then all the Roman soldiers are trying to make money. They're like, we'll take the stones apart to try to find the gold that's stuck in between the stones. And Jesus said that would happen. He said, you see this? Not one stone's going to be on another. And they're like, yeah. And again, and that's what happened. Exactly like he said it would happen. Now, in 130 AD, a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba, you may have heard this, rises up to power, all right? And the Bar Kokhba revolt, again, they get brief self-governance here. Now, what's interesting is go to John chapter 5, verse 43. And I'm going to tell you what I think is a fascinating verse. And I think this application, I had a Messianic Jew share this with me, and I will share it with you. It's not original with me, and I thought this is interesting. Jesus says this, I've come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, you will receive him. That is a prophecy for the Antichrist and for many other messiahs. I had a Jew tell me this week, he said, Jesus isn't the Messiah. I said, why not? He said, because the Messiah will rebuild the temple. He'll bring all the Jews to the land. And he'll create world peace. And I thought, you just described the Antichrist. So, Bar Kokhba revolts, and people followed him and believed he was the Messiah because he was throwing off the yoke of Rome. But the Bar Kokhba revolt, at this point, the Romans are so angry because after they did 70 AD, they came back, the Jews did, they were still in the land, and they rise up again and try to get self-governance. And with this Bar Kokhba revolt, they get so mad that they not only destroy them, because they had the land for a few years, they held out for a long time, but they're going to sow salt into the Holy Land, and they say, who are the mortal enemies of the Jews? And who would you say in the Old Testament is their biggest enemy? One group, the Philistines. And they said, it's the Philistines. And the Romans said, we will rename this land, not Judah and Samaria, not Israel, not Judah, Palestine. That's when the name Palestine first originated, was with the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And why did they name it Palestine? They named it Palestine because they wanted to insult the Jews. All right? And they also renamed Jerusalem. And that's when Palestine became the name. Now, a couple other fascinating things about this eternal enemy of the Philistines. Judges chapter 16. I want to give you some key verses here. I think you'll find this interesting. Judges 13, 14, 15, 16. The life Samson. By the time you get to the last chapter, which is 16, he has his eyes plucked out, right? He's playing around with Delilah. He gets his eyes plucked out. And it says this in verse 21 of Judges 16. The Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza. Interesting. Philistines and Gaza. Bound him with bronze chains. And he grinded in the prison. Now, the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a sacrifice to Dagon, their god. Now, this is when Samson stands between the pillars and kills 3,000 men by pushing the pillars, 3,000 men and women, he pushes the pillars down and he kills the people there. Dagon is their god. It's this bizarre fish god. They're sea people. They're probably from maybe Crete originally. They are Philistines, and they are the eternal enemy. That's where Samson had his eyes gouged out, and that's where they did the Samson strategy. Okay? Now, let's go to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 17. When you go to 1 Samuel 17, you get the account of a guy named Goliath. All right? In verse 23 it says, behold, the champion, the Philistines from Gath, named Goliath. So he was a Philistine, and he's from Gath, which is in the modern-day Gaza Strip. So that whole thing, when David, he's like 17 years old, 18 years old, and he's looking at this guy. He's like 9 feet tall. And all the warriors, all the Jewish warriors are scared. And he walks out with nothing on but his slingshot. And he said, we will not let this uncircumcised Philistine insult the people of God. He said he's a Philistine. David called him out. All right. Now, 1 Samuel 5, which I don't have a lot of time to cover because I've got a lot more to cover here. In 1 Samuel 5, it's when the Ark of the Covenant goes down and is put in the temple of Dagon. And in the morning, Dagon is on its face in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And they're kind of freaked out. And then they prop Dagon back up and they go to bed. And the next day, Dagon not only falls down, but his arms and head fall off. And they're like, they put the Ark of the Covenant on a donkey or cart or whatever, and they send it back to the Jewish people. They captured it in battle, and then they're like, we don't want this thing because of what happened. It's kind of a funny story, how God does stuff. All right. So some things that I think are important for you to know is the existence of some Islamic imagery in the Old Testament. I'm going to go to Judges, all right? And maybe you've read this, maybe you know it, or maybe you'll be a little surprised. Judges chapter 8, there's a battle. Orah and Zeb, Zebah and Zalmunna. And in verse 21, Zebah and Zalmunna, always look for those names, rise up and fall on us. As the man, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna. He took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. What? I thought that was a Muslim symbol. Allah was one of the gods in Ur of the Chaldees, and he's the moon god, and that's the symbol of the crescent moon. And they weigh out the crescent ornaments in verse 26. But their camels came into battle with the crescent moon on them. And you're like, oh, come on, Pastor, you're just pulling out one little passage. Well, let's go to Isaiah. And you'll see it again. Isaiah chapter 3, verse 18. All right. In that day, the Lord will take away the beauty of their anklets, their headbands, and their crescent ornaments, dangling earrings. So the women of God's people were wearing crescent ornaments, and the Lord said, I'm going to take those away. I'm tired of those. All right? Galatians 1:8 says, even if an angel from heaven should come and preach you a different gospel, may that angel be accursed. Mormonism had an angel come to Joseph Smith. Or maybe he was hallucinating because he was an insane thief and immoral. That's just my own opinion. Sorry, Mormons. Come over to Christ. He's better. Islam was founded in 622. Muhammad was in a cave. He married a much older lady who was his benefactor. And he actually said it was the demons that were attacking him. His wife convinced him it was God. And it was an angel that was sent from God and gave him the Quran. And because Muhammad was illiterate, he didn't write it down. He just would share it. And so his followers would try to write down what the angel had told him. Not a very reliable system of transmission. All right? So in 622, Islam is founded. They take the Holy Land by 633. Now in 632, Muhammad dies. When Muhammad dies, you get two of the big splits. Now, if you talk about the Middle East, you got Iran, who are Persians and Shia. You got Saudis, who are Arabs and Sunni. You've got Turkey. By the way, you think our interest rate's bad? You know what Turkey's interest rate hit in September? 30%. Man, Erdogan, you know how to handle the economy. Turkey, they're Turks, right? And they're kind of somewhere between Europeans and Middle Easterners, but they're Sunni as well. Egypt is Sunni, and they've always wanted power. You got obviously Israel, Jews, a secular state, but the big power factions would be Turkey, because Egypt used to want power, it isn't really there anymore. Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And remember, if you're Muslim and you need to go do your pilgrimages, you got to go to Saudi Arabia. Muhammad was born in Saudi Arabia. Muhammad died in Saudi Arabia. He was born in Medina, and then it's the second holiest site. And then Mecca is where the Kaaba is, and that's the holiest site. The third holiest site, they've got about 6 or 7 different places that qualify. Jerusalem is not mentioned once in the Quran. Not once. It's the Alaska, the faraway mosque. Well, what's far away? Could be Dearborn, Michigan, for all we know. Okay, I'll keep moving on. All right. The two groups they divided into Shia and Sunni. And how they divided was Shia believed that it was bloodline that should take over Islam. So his nephew, his son-in-law, which was Ali ibn Abd, took over. The Sunnis believed it was the most holy person. And who took over was a guy named Abu Bakr. Now, do you remember ISIS? Remember the head guy for ISIS, what his name was? Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He's from Baghdad. But he took Abu Bakr's name from Sunni Islam. And both are violent. And he took that because the Quran's violent, so the Hadiths. He took it and made that his name. So you got a split. Hezbollah is Shia. Iran is Shia. Hamas is Sunni. All right? So just think these things through. All right. So you've got Jews living in the land. The land gets conquered by Islam, but there's just still Jews living there. The Crusaders come and briefly take possession of the land for a period, maybe 150 years, around 10,000. But there's still Jews living there. The Crusaders, sadly, weren't very good to Jews either. The Ottomans take control of the Holy Land in 1516, and they have it till after World War I. World War I, the Ottomans go down, Austro-Hungary goes down, the German Empire goes down. Lots of empires fell after World War I. And then we go to nation states. So by the time you get to World War I, there's still Jews living in the land. The Ottomans didn't allow any Jews to own land, or to buy land, but they would secretly go in, and like with the Arab traders, they'd secretly buy land. So they were getting land through purchase, and they were leaving areas like in Eastern Europe where there was anti-Semitism was on the rise, and where they were poor. The Armenians had their genocide after World War I, and just so you know, that's what Hitler studied for the genocide of the Jews. All right? So if you ever look up the Armenian genocide, and there's a lot going on in Armenia today. Soviet Union obviously came into being after World War I. Lots of things happened on the board. All right? Now, Isaiah 11:12 says, I'm going to collect you from the four corners of the earth and bring you back to the land. Babylon, they went east and came back west. That's it. Today, they're being collected from the four corners of the earth. And a nation was born in one day, 1948. May 14th, 1948. And Isaiah says, can a nation be born today? Have we ever seen anything like this? And it is. But what's fascinating is, in the late 1800s, 1894, there was a guy serving in the French military who was Jewish named Dreyfus. And this is very well known among the Jews. I don't think as Gentiles we know this very well. But he was accused for spying for Austro-Hungary. And because of the Dreyfus affair, he was falsely accused and he was put away. The Jews started to realize anti-Semitism, this is in the 1800s, is on the rise in Europe. So a guy named Theodor Herzl, who was not really very religious, said the Jews need a holy land, need a land, right? They need a state. Now, they were already living in the Middle East. Now, what's fascinating is, after World War I, lots of people divided into nation states, okay? I mean, we got Westphalia, I know that, but then we kind of, again, you got this happening where all of a sudden, you got, nation states are dividing up. So it makes perfect sense. Herzl also rebirthed Hebrew, okay? They were speaking Yiddish, which is kind of this kind of throwing languages together. But he wanted Hebrew spoken again, and so they had Hebrew. So after World War I, you've got Jews moving to the Holy Land. You've got no Ottoman Empire. So then two groups, Sykes and Picot, a French and a British guy, divide the Holy Land. And the Holy Land gets divided with the northern part, with kind of Syria and up, is the French part, Lebanon and Syria. The southern part is British. It's the British Mandate. And the British, because of their industry, wanted a couple things. They wanted the port of Haifa wide open, and they wanted oil from the Middle East to get to them. That's what they needed, right? So then they had the British Mandate. Arthur Balfour, who's a believer, comes up with the Balfour Declaration, and he says the Jews need to have self-governance in a land. Now, this is a time when lots of nations are being reborn, all right, after World War I, and redefined. So the British not only had a mandate to rule over the Middle East, Balfour had a declaration that they should have their own land. Now, many Jews are making Aliyah at this time, after World War I. Aliyah means going up, which means they're going to the spiritual place, which is to Jerusalem or to the Holy Land. They're moving back to the Holy Land. All right? And they're living alongside their Arab, by the way, they're Arab at this point, neighbors. They're just living there with them. The British are going to pull out in 1948. Israel makes a declaration that they're a nation, May 14, 1948. Within the declaration, it says they're a secular state, essentially, and they'll respect all religions and all peoples. So Arabs can live there. You know there's Arabs on the Supreme Court in Israel? You know there's Arabs who sit in the Knesset? There's a couple million Arabs that live in Israel. There's Arabs that serve in the IDF. Did you know that? There's mosques all over Israel for the Arabs that live there. And the Jews are secular, by and large. It's funny how the media doesn't tell you the truth. They're a bunch of lying, degenerate. I'll stop there. I have more. They tell you what they want to tell you to manipulate you because they think they can. So, 1948, they declare themselves a nation. Now, immediately, what happens is in Psalm 83. And I believe this is when it's fulfilled. If you turn to Psalm 83 in your Bibles, you may want to turn there because this is interesting. Not like all of it hopefully hasn't been interesting, but this is very fascinating. I believe this is exactly what happened. They declare themselves a nation state, and who attacks them? All right? Verse 2. Well, he asked God not to be silent in verse 1. Verse 2. Behold, your enemies have made an uproar. Those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people. They conspire together against your treasured ones. Now, if you're an Arab, and you're an Arab now, you're not a Palestinian, you're still an Arab. 1948. You're not a Palestinian yet. There's a war breaking out. So some of them left their homes because they were told by all these nations around, we're going to roll over this new country in an afternoon. So why don't you head up to Syria or to Lebanon or over to Jordan and then go home after the war's over. 1948, the Arab-Israeli War. Those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people. They conspire together against your treasured ones. All 1948 this happened. They have said, come, let us wipe them out as a nation. 1948. And the name of Israel be remembered no longer. They have conspired together with one mind. And they make a covenant. They made an agreement. The tents of Edom, Palestine, modern-day Palestine, South Jordan as well. All right. Ishmaelites, Saudi Arabia. A few did come from Saudi Arabia. Moab, Jordan, which is also Ammon. Gebal, which is Lebanon. Philistia, which is Gaza. Assyria, which is Syria. Amalek, which is the Sinai Arab Peninsula, which they came from. Tyre is Lebanon. That's who came. All the countries that are close to Israel united together, even though they have a lot of differences, and tried to roll over Israel in 1948. Now, some of them had been redrawn. Some people the British had put into power, like Hussein's from Saudi Arabia. In Jordan, the king is really, his family line's from Saudi Arabia, but he got sent up to Jordan and could rule that land. So the thing is when David Ben-Gurion, who was secular, said, we're going to be a nation, this war breaks out. When this war breaks out, some of the Arabs living among the Jews do leave and go to other countries. Now, if you are a Palestinian living in Lebanon, which is just north of Israel, and you move there in 1948, you cannot buy land, you cannot have certain jobs, and you are not a citizen. To this day. Your grandchildren are not citizens. Have you heard that on the news? Have you heard about the apartheid state of the Hezbollah and how they mistreat the Palestinians in Lebanon? No, you haven't. You guys are going to stop watching the news after this. They lose the war. In 1967, they have the Khartoum Resolution, which is famous 3 no's. No peace with Israel, no recognition of the state of Israel, and no negotiation. Okay? We look up the Khartoum Resolution, look at who was there. It's in Sudan, and all these Muslim countries come together and say, no peace, no recognition, no negotiation. All right? Now, you know that they had the Six-Day War, and then they had a war in 73. You know about some of those wars. Modern day, the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, founded by Yasser Arafat. You know where Yasser Arafat was born? Cairo, Egypt. Some of this story doesn't get out. It started in 59, kind of assembling, and by 64, it was a political movement. All right? So it wasn't until the 60s that they took the term Palestine Liberation Organization and they called the people Palestinians. Now, when the Jews moved back, before the 60s, there were Arabs and there were Palestinians. And you know who the Palestinians were when they moved back? The Jews. If a Jew moved back in 1920, he was called a Palestinian. All right? Again, things we don't know that we are not taught. Now, what's also interesting, at least I think it's interesting, is that PLO, which is now Fatah, all right, so they had the war, they lost. Some of those people stayed in countries, like in Jordan, there's There's problems in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, all with the Palestinian people that were Arabs who lived in the Holy Land that were living there. You know who killed the most Palestinians in one day? Who do you think? The king of Jordan, 1971. 3,000 in one day. He mowed them over. Not covered. Not discussed. Now, what I want to tell you is, so Yasser Arafat, there's a lot of different political things that happen, which I don't have time to get into, about trying to get peace. When Israel defeated Egypt and they took the Sinai, because when they had their when they had a war, the Yom Kippur War, they ended up taking the Golan Heights, what we call Judea and Samaria. They call the West Bank. I prefer Judea and Samaria, which include Jerusalem. And they took the Sinai. When they took the Sinai, they came together with Egypt, and they put a peace treaty together, and they said, we'll sign a peace treaty, but you can have the Sinai back. That's when they got this idea of land for peace, all right? So they kept saying, if we give up land, we can have peace. They have a peace with Jordan right now. Jordan actually oversees the Temple Mount. So there's not the king of Jordan, he saber rattles. Like, just shut up. He saber rattles. But they don't like Palestinians. They don't want any Palestinians in Jordan, which is, wait for it, why no other Muslim country wants to take Palestinian refugees. Why would you put them on a ship or a plane and fly them to America? Because we've got embedded people in our Congress. It's the only reason why you bring them here, okay? Send them to another Muslim nation. They want to be Muslims. They think they're right. They think they're right and they're better, and they don't really live together in poly-religious society at all. Name one country that has Islam as its dominant faith, that other religions are freely practiced. I'll wait. Yeah, 0. So if they want to come here and they want to not be that kind of Muslim, I guess, but that kind of Muslim is not really following the Quran. That's what the Quran teaches. We got to be dhimmis. Now, what I want to tell you about the Palestinian, what they call the land of Palestine right now, is that the Gaza Strip, it's always had the Philistines. There's always been a battle between God's people and the Philistines. Jewish people have lived in this land since they came back out of Exodus, right? So you're talking thousands of years there's been Jews living in that land. They were given the land under Abraham by God. People talk about a two-state solution. Putin mentioned two-state solution. Of course, I thought, Vlad, I don't know that you were around in 2005. Maybe, I don't know, you were riding a bear or something for a photo shoot. Just kidding, that's all photoshopped. In 2005, there were Jews living in the Gaza Strip. IDF went into the Gaza Strip with guns and took them out of their homes. And they had to leave. And they said, under George W. Bush, by the way, just another great thing he did as president, we're going to give the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians. This is their state. They have self-governance. So then they go to the polls. And 80%, people always say, the Nazis, they only got like 37% in their election in Germany. And that's true. That's fair. Hamas, a terror group, gets 80% of a Democratic vote. And Mahmoud Abbas, who said a Fatah, which is like Hamas, it's like PLO, it's like that wing, it's PLO renamed. He's in year 16 of a 4-year term. Only if our presidents could figure that out, eh? Right? They haven't had any elections. Now, they're kind of sick of his rule, so they were coming up on an election, which is, I think, part of the reason why these things all happen. All right? I think somebody doesn't want to relinquish power. But they've had their own state since 2005 with self-governance. Now, what does Israel provide? It provides power. It provides water. Benny Gantz, who I'm not a fan of politically, who has been saber-rattling a lot because he's with Netanyahu and his cabinet. When he was prime minister, he gave 17,000 worker visas so people living in the Gaza Strip could come over and work and go home the same day and take the money back. Because what do we think? If they have jobs, they won't want to kill us. And now we find out that some of those people that had worker visas that were coming across on the only pedestrian crossing in the northeast corner, the pedestrian crossing, guess what? Some of them were doing intel to figure out what was happening on the 7th as they were finishing the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. Just facts. Rabbis were asked, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And they're like, why do they care? And they were doing intel. All right? About 20,000 crossed every day to work in Israel and go back to the Gaza Strip. SodaStream, which people don't want to buy because it's from Israel, is a Jewish company. And you can make your own pop at home, which is a great idea. SodaStream is a Jewish company from Israel, and people who want to be pro-Palestinian, Palestinian from the 60s, like if the Beatles were out before you were called that name, I don't know if I can really believe it. All right? They employ Arabs. But people say because it comes from Israel, we want to boycott it. And SodaStream said, you're putting the people you say you support out of work if you boycott us. Okay? So we need to be educated as believers. This is an eternal battle. God gave his people this land. It is their land. Nations, when they support Israel, are blessed. Who's been the strongest supporter of Israel? America. And we have been blessed while we've supported Israel for all of our faults. For a time, we were not supporting Israel. And Canada was the strongest supporter of Israel. Joel Rosenberg said that. You should look him up. He's really good. And Canada had one of the best economies in the world. At that time, they do not support Israel at all right now, and they are a mess. Just saying. Now, under Barack Obama, a major shift happened. And it's part of the reason why the Middle East is so chaotic. What happened was, after World War II, Churchill kind of drew the boundaries of the countries in the Middle East, which is why they look a little sketchy. They're a little off sometimes. Like if you looked at Syria, you're like, who drew that? He probably had too much port. But they tried to put minority leadership like Bashar al-Assad in Syria, who's Alawite, which is Sunni, who's like 14% Sunni in Syria, if I remember correctly. He rules over the Shias, okay? So they tried to counterbalance. We always, as America, were with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is Sunni. Of course, Saudi Arabia gives us oil, right? We get oil. We like the oil, although we can frack and we should just get our own now. That's my opinion. But we were getting it from Saudi Arabia. So we were always Sunni. That's who we came down with. And then then Iran, Shia, we didn't even deal with Iran. Under Obama, our foreign policy changed, and I checked this with a number of people, from being more Sunni-focused to being more focused on Shia, which is why Mohammed bin Salman, who's the coming king, he's the prince in waiting till his father passes away, has been talking to Israel and all the Gulf states, Oman and UAE and Bahrain. They're all talking to Israel privately because they've seen that Egypt has a peace treaty with Israel and Jordan. And they were talking about getting some kind of peace brokered because they have the same enemy. Who's their enemy? Iran. And when you look at the Gulf, Persian Gulf, and it comes down and you're like, that's where the oil comes out of. Like a ton of the world's oil comes out of there. You get to the Straits of Hormuz when it kind of, when that horn of that Saudi peninsula comes up, that Straits of Hormuz right by Iran. You don't think Iran wants to shut that down and shut our oil off? Of course they do. So Saudis have realized Iran's the problem. The Persians. The Shias. So let's make peace with Israel. That's part of what's going on right now. What's happening in the Gaza Strip is to try to undermine the peace with Israel, which is why Iran, in my view, has crossed Sunni Shia boundaries and is working with, as a Shia, is funding and supporting and working with the Sunnis in this attack on Israel. Okay. There's a lot more I could say, but we're already 10 minutes over. So I'm going to ask if you have any questions. And then we will dismiss you. I hope. Yes, Ed. Yes. They never have occupied that. The largest swath the Jews have had was under King David. And it was quite well across what is the Jordan River. He never breaks a promise. Yeah, I mean, I believe that because really what's in question is, in my mind, the city that everybody, which has no port, is Jerusalem. Jerusalem's a city in question, but where does Christ return? He returns to where? Jerusalem. He puts his foot down on the Mount of Olives, right? Yeah. And then he's going to reign on the throne of David. And I believe that when he has that millennial kingdom, I think they'll finally have the land as prescribed. They didn't get the land because of their lack of faith and faithfulness. Well, I think it can be after the tribulation of the millennial kingdom. I don't think it has to be before the rapture. I don't think so. I think this promise will be fulfilled when Christ rules and reigns because they were so unfaithful. That would be my thought process there. And I could be wrong, and you could be right. You're usually right, Ed. I don't know. Yeah, Karen's shaking her head. Don't shake your head, Karen. But it is interesting because they have, I mean, basically this little swath of land. And even under Obama, he said they need to go back to the 1967 borders. And they're like, at one point we got 6 miles of width. We can't survive, right? And that was one thing, that when they kept getting attacked, they kept winning battles and they kept taking land. And so now, I think when Christ rules and reigns, they'll finally get what they were promised. Because we will go up and celebrate at the temple. And we will go to Jerusalem. And we will go see Jesus on this earth. And you're going to ask me, how's that all going to work? And I'm going to tell you, I don't fully know. I think with glorified bodies, we'll just be able to say, I want to be in Jerusalem and go there, right? As opposed to like get on a plane and stuff. But yeah, we'll have to see. All right, are there other questions? Yes. Yeah. They would say that because people who claim Christianity sometimes aren't born again and sometimes haven't read the Bible and don't have an understanding of history. The Romans changed the land name. They made the word up Palestine. Yeah. Well, and they're so sacramental. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. So here's the thing. Let me share a word with you. Baptize. You guys know what that word means. If you're living in 1400 and you hear the word baptize, you're going to say, "What's that?" Because the King James Bible hadn't been maybe even 1500s, because 1611 was when the King James Bible was translated. And when the translators got to the word immerse in Greek, and they read immerse, they looked at each other and went, our churches sprinkle. Our churches are paying for this. So let's take the Greek word and make it English. So they literally took the Greek word and baptizo and made it an English word. So the word Palestine is Latin for Philistine, and that was literally made after the Bar Kokhba revolt. So how could Jesus be something that didn't even exist after his death? Like he's born, he dies, resurrects, ascends, and the word is not even a word. How could that exist? It can't. So he can't be a Palestinian. And I would tell people when they say the Palestinians have lived there for generations, I'd say, when did that word become a word? And when did they take on the word Palestinian? Because they were Arabs in the 50s, and they were Arabs in the early 60s until they took the name Palestinian. Right? So that's the facts. That may not go well with what you hear at a university, but I'd rather have the truth and the way it is and deal with that. So yeah, Jesus being a Palestinian, that's very sad. I mean, he's got to have read the genealogies of Jesus. Like, has he not read Matthew 1, Luke 3? It tells you he's a Jew. There's 12 tribes. He calls 12 disciples. They're all Jewish. They all celebrate the Jewish feasts. He fulfills the Jewish feasts. Like, if we don't have Judaism, like, we don't, we're like a fresh cut flower. That's our roots. Our roots are coming out of Judaism. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Either I was very clear, or you guys want to just go home, and maybe it's both. Oh, Sarah has one. Yeah. Yeah, and Bethlehem was it was a Jewish city, it was a Christian city, and as they've given like the West Bank disputed territory, they consider that Palestine now, right? So, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm not French, and I was born in Ohio, and France used to control Ohio. I'm not English, and England used to control Ohio. And I'm certainly not Native American, and Native Americans used to control Ohio. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Muslims need the gospel. Islam is a religion that takes them to hell. Jews need the gospel. A lot of them are secular, and a lot of them deny Jesus as the Messiah, and Jesus said he's the only way to God. So they need the gospel. So both sides need the gospel. The difference is that you've got a secular state that allows for freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and for a multiplicity of religious expressions. And then you have the Palestinians that are run by a terrorist group. And Lebanon, which was a nation that was designed for Christians, is now run by Hezbollah, right? And so, yeah, that's a good point because Bethlehem. So, all right. Oh, is there a question? Oh, a text? Sorry. Okay, hang on. Is why we left Saddam Hussein in power after the first Gulf War? Yeah, Saddam Hussein. He was. Yeah. Okay, is that why we left Saddam Hussein in power after the first Gulf War? As as a Sunni, he balanced the Shia in Iran. Yes, 100%. And that's why we've also turned a blind eye to sometimes people that were, let's just say, didn't have the best track record to keep stability. Because our goal, like the British, when we go to a country, is to what? We don't want to rule it. We don't want to take it over. We would like to trade with you. And we'd like some good deals. And you have stuff we want. Maybe you have oil, or you have a spice, or you have something. Who knows, right? And so that's why Saddam Hussein stayed in power. And how did Saddam Hussein get taken? He got taken down by his own people, right? And Gaddafi, who was part Italian, right, in Libya, he said, don't take me out. It's going to be a lot worse after I'm gone. He was right. So we leave these despots in power. Here's the other thing, too. Islam is submission, okay? It's not like Muslims do not think like you think. They don't. They don't. They're not raised for free thought. They're not raised for free expression. They're not raised to question. I have people who question me all the time, okay? You don't question your imam, ever. I don't mind questions. Let's talk it through. Let's dialogue it through. And I'll present my argument. They'll present their argument. And sometimes people walk away and go, yeah, your arguments aren't convincing, Pastor. Okay. Okay, make your own choices. So the problem is that these groups don't function the way people who speak English, who've had freedom since the 1200s, function. We're very different. I'm not saying that, I am saying our ideas are better, actually. I'm not saying we're better genetically, but our ideas are better. But you can't just walk in and say, here's your state, and here's free elections, because 80% go out and vote for the terrorist group. You can't do it. It's going to take generations of people, and that's why the Jewish state is so sustainable, is because as people have moved there, they came from areas that had a level of democratic interaction, and so they all the time have elections, and never once that I can think of in the last 25 years has one party had a majority. One party has enough seats that they can get other parties to join them to get 61 to vote with them. And it's 120 in the Knesset, and then that's a majority. That's how it works. Even the Likud, like the one that Netanyahu's over, I think they have like 30-some seats in the Knesset right now. They have like a quarter. It's just a different type of world, right? And Arabs who have lived under Israel, in Israel, I mean, I saw a message from an Arab in Arabic talking to the Muslim world. He was in the IDF today. I was talking about how good Israel's been to her, and that we're not after you, fellow Arabs. We are after the terrorists. Don't let them use you as shields. That's the other thing. Tell your neighbors. What group of people pulls their wife in front of them when they're going to get a knife or stabbed or shot? Or their child? That's how they do it. You can't say they don't. They do. Let's call a spade a spade. All right, let's pray. I went way too long. Lord, thank you for tonight. Bless us as we go. Help us to love people who don't know you, whether that's Jews or Muslims or atheists or Christians who don't know you, Lord. Help us to just love them and point them to Jesus Christ. He's the answer. And you've said all this stuff in advance. You said this is how it's going to unfold. And so, Lord, we're not shaken, but we are confident that what's happening today has gone across a sovereign Lord's desk. And we pray for a revival in Israel, among Jews, among Arabs, among atheists, whomever. And we pray for a turning to you of Muslims all through what we call the Muslim world, and through Judea and Samaria, and through the Gaza Strip. What they need is salvation in Christ. That's what will solve these problems. Help us to love and serve you as we go. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.